In this episode, Firebolt gets a big suspension upgrade. Let's go. In our last episode, I gave you a long overdue update on Project Firebolt. We chased down some bugs, and parts arrived for our front suspension upgrade. Now it's time to bolt it all up and test it all out. Let's get to work. This is the stock 2002 Tacoma two-wheel drive front suspension. This assembly has been perfected by Toyota engineers who spent countless hours testing and refining their design to provide decades of trouble-free use. Well, one thing they couldn't have seen coming is at some point in the future, a guy in Tennessee would jam a GM iron block V8 in the nose of the truck they worked so hard to perfect. Sorry, fellas. As expected, that experiment didn't go well and resulted in a nose-down, tail-up stance and a suspension that couldn't handle the average bump in the road. Let's get this sorted out. Okay, now that we got the wheels off, the next step is to remove all the things that bolt to the lower control arm so we can remove those and modify them. Our first step in disassembly is to remove the stock front shocks. With those out of the way, I'm coating all of the fasteners with Blaster to make removal much easier. So before we put on our coil spring compressors, I'm going to remove these little brake line brackets. With those brake lines freed up, the next job is to compress the stock coil springs in order to remove them. To do this job, I picked up these spring compressors from summitracing.com. Okay, now we're down here on the ground, mainly because I just like the idea of being able to support that lower arm with the floor jack versus a pole jack or something that might be a little tippy. So with the coil spring compressed and the jack underneath this lower control arm, now I'm going to disconnect these bolts that connect it to the hub, and then we'll be able to take out that lower control arm. Here's a good look at the lower control arm, and here are the 4 nuts we had to remove. 1, 2, 3, 4 to free it up. All right, hub is disconnected from the lower control arm. With the hub detached, I carefully lowered the jack and removed the coil spring, followed by the control arm. With the springs on the ground, now we can remove the spring compressors. All right, let's get rid of this bump stop. In case you didn't see the last video, I'm using a set of MJB Fab's coilover conversion plates for the first gen 5-lug Toyota Tacoma. They're custom made for Tacoma owners who want an easy way to convert to QA1 coilovers to either lower their truck or beef up the front after a V8 swap. All right, Torch, give me the plates. Come on, just let go, let go. Can't believe I'm having a tug of war with a Lego, man. Come on, give me the thing. Dude, would you let go of it? Jeez, finally. Okay, now that we've got our lower control arms ripped off of Firebolt, now we can cut off this spring perch here so we can mount our coilover conversion plates right on there like that. Just in case you've never seen this tip before, you can save yourself tons of time by getting a few of these cheap grinders. You can have one for cutting, one for grinding, and one for finish work. I have a flap disc on this one. It just saves so much time versus switching these wheels out. All right, this is the fun part. Time to throw some sparks. Okay, here's a little before and after shot. Here's that stock spring perch, and here it is lopped off. Let's clean that up, then we'll move on to the next one. All right, we got our first one looking pretty good and cleaned off. Now let's grab our plate. We'll weld that in place right about there. Now the plates have a certain orientation, and Michael includes the instructions for you, but the reason is to clear all these mounting points on the lower control arm. All right, let's give that same treatment to the other control arm. All right, control arm number 2 is cleaned up and ready to go. Here's what you're left with after you cut those spring perches off. Now before we weld that plate to this control arm, I'm going to spray on some of this Duplicolor Weld Through Primer. That'll keep everything rust-free around here. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1, whoosh. Oh my God, that's cold. All right, our weld-through primer is nice and dry. In Michael's instructions here, it shows the orientation of these plates. This is very important. And I'm just gonna plop these down right where they go. Now I've got the hardware here. What I'm gonna do is bolt these in place and then we'll weld them up. Okay, we've got our arms all welded up. Let's throw some paint on them. And you know I'm using my favorite paint, Summit Racing's General Chassis Enamel. There's the part number. I love this stuff. With the shop all clean, let's bring over the shiny bits. First up, we have a set of QA1's Coilover springs, which are lighter and offer more travel versus conventional springs. Next, we have these QA1 Pro Coil shocks. They offer independent compression and rebound adjustment knobs and are built to perform. Just getting my hands on these and checking them out, I am super impressed with the quality and the fit and finish of these things. They are so nice. Next up is this roller thrust bearing and washer kit, which will provide less bind on the attachment points of our coilovers. Finally, we have these spanner wrenches, which we'll use to adjust our ride height. As a reminder, these were the parts that the tech folks at QA1 recommended based on the specs of my truck. If you're doing something custom, I would suggest contacting them to get the best recommendation for your setup. Look at this thing, it's beautiful. Okay, I've got everything laid out here. Now I'm going to spend a little quality time with these instructions. Here's a side-by-side comparison of our stock shock and coil spring compared to our new QA1 parts. The QA1 shock isn't fully extended here. When they are, they're about the same length as the stock one. Alright, the paint has dried on our lower control arms, so we can begin the reassembly process. Really love how these turned out. Nice and clean with the plates in there. Alright, since the paint is dry on our arms and they're ready to go, our next step is to start to assemble these shocks and coat everything with anti-seize. And you know how this stuff is, it's gonna get everywhere. Alright, well, I guess I'll get ready to just be completely covered in this stuff. Let's get to it. Okay, now we screw the aluminum lock nut with the shoulder up, and the spring seat adjuster nut, also with the shoulder up, down the threads here. Okay, our next step is to install this thrust bearing washer kit. All right, now we put anti-seize on these and install them. Look at this. I swear I'm trying not to get it everywhere. I'm just doing what the instructions tell me, people. That's all I'm doing here. I promise I'm using just a tiny amount. It looks like I put the whole jar on here. Why am I so bad at anti-seize? It's on my face, isn't it? Okay, now we extend the piston rod all the way. There we go. Put one of these little washers on here. One of these little rubber bushings. Right there like that. Now you got the flat end of the spring, the small end. That's just gonna go right down onto that adjustment collar like that. Okay, let's get our modified lower control arms back in. Next, we slide in our QA1 coilover assembly and bolt it up. Okay, our passenger side is installed and everything's torqued down. There it goes there. Now what we need to do is to set our ride height. I have these collars just set at this lowest point. There's just like 2 threads here, and I've got it the same on either side. So after we install the driver's side, we'll get it on the ground and then get this ride height all set up. Oh, one quick note is you can put these adjustment knobs on either side. You can either put them facing inward or facing outward. Seems like outward would be the more convenient place, but the Tacoma has all this stuff over here. So I aimed them in, and I think actually I could be able to adjust them with the wheel on that way. Now, installing the new QA1 coilover setup is actually a lot easier than removing the stock stuff, because it all goes in one piece, and you don't need a coil spring compressor like we needed on the way out. So very straightforward, just the reverse of disassembly. I found this easier to do on the floor, just using the floor jack to control the height of my lower control arm as it went up. That made it way easier to reinstall these brackets here and line everything up versus doing it up in the air. That looks excellent. I can't wait to try this out on the road. Let's get the wheels on. With the truck on the ground, we can set our ride height. Now this hasn't fully settled, but this is near the bottom of our adjustment collar. We could probably go another 3/4 to an inch lower from here if we wanted. I'm looking for a near stock ride height, so let's get to adjusting. Okay, we've got our initial ride height set up and our shock settings ready to go. Now we just need to fire up the truck and make sure we don't have any leaks from our power steering repair we did earlier. All right, we fixed that power steering leak. Now it's time to test out that suspension. Come on, let's go for a rip. Look at the steam. Cold out here this morning. Here's a quick shot of where we are with our ride height. I'm really happy with this. It's more how I want the truck to sit. More like a stock look. You know I like that sleeper look. The best thing about coilovers are all the adjustments you can make. You know, if you want to go a little higher, a little lower, you can do that at any time. It's nice to have options, but I'm really digging this stock look right now. What's up, everybody? We're here in Project Firebolt. What's more fun than going on a test drive and trying out your new performance parts? Nothing! So let's go. All right, folks, I've been driving around a while and I thought I'd give you some of my impressions of this new suspension setup. Now, right off the bat, I can tell you that it feels so good to be sitting level again. I'd been getting so annoyed with that nose down stance and I just felt like I was sliding off my seat and staring down at the ground when I drove this thing. And now it just feels like a normal truck, like you're just sitting up nice and level, good view. You don't feel like you're, you're about to drive off a cliff. So huge thumbs up in that regard. The next massive improvement is it's no longer bouncing off the bump stops. That front suspension, I'm telling you, it was just totally overworked with the V8 in the front. And anytime I'd hit any sort of bumps in the road, if the road wasn't glass smooth, forget it. I mean, it was just had this bouncy, sort of crashy feeling. Now you're driving down the road and it just handles all the bumps and things just like a normal suspension should. I mean, I'm super impressed with how this thing feels. The next thing that was immediately apparent is that the truck is now easier to steer. I think what was going on with that nose being smashed down is maybe the tie rod ends were at a weird angle or something like that, but the steering effort was a little high at times, and now it just feels like a completely stock steering suspension and front end. Huge improvement in that regard too. Love that. Now you saw earlier in the video that these QA1 shocks have adjustments for compression and rebound. I've never owned a shock like this before, so I've got them set just straight up right now, and I'm happy with the ride. It does feel a little firm at times, so I contacted my man Bill at QA1 who gave me some awesome tips and advice, so I think when we get back I'll make a couple changes to those settings and then try those out. So as you can probably tell, I'm super thrilled with how this has all turned out and how it performs. It's such a massive upgrade over what we had before. That setup just felt so sketchy under so many different conditions, and this just feels controlled, and I'm confident in how it'll perform. You know, if we need to take a quick emergency maneuver or something, or jam on the brakes or haul some stuff, I just feel like it's going to perform great in all those situations. In addition to all that, all the adjustability we now have. We can adjust the height at any time we want, up or down. We've got all of those shock settings. So there's tons of custom adjustments we can do based on different situations. So I'm excited to try that stuff out too. Okay, now it's time for the all-important towing test. Thank you for watching, and thank you to Summit Racing for making this video series possible. They are the LS Swap experts and offer everything you need to build the car or truck of your dreams. Be sure to visit summitracing.com, grab a catalog, or download their handy app for all of your horsepower needs. Also, don't forget to come hang out with me in any of these spots. I'd love to hear from you. So with that said, thanks again, folks. We'll see you next time.